I'm looking forward to getting into your big band debut, Communal Heart, and kind of your world of music. So thank you for taking a minute out today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's begin our journey before we get into the new album by asking you this. 5 years ago, we were all trying to figure out this pandemic. It was barreling down, it wiped away schedules, changed so many things. How much of living through that pandemic as an artist, a musician, affected the way that you either approach this album or the way that you live life today in 2025?
Wow. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, it's pretty wild. I mean, I remember very clearly the first gig I did with, three of my friends coming out of the pandemic, which, well, we were still weren't really out of it, but I think it was like maybe fall of 21. We finally did an outdoor gig for the first time, and the excitement that we all felt and the freshness of the music was really like nothing I had ever experienced before. And it was very much an eye-opening thing where it was like, okay, we have to understand that this is something very special, and just to be able to do this is a gift, and we cannot take it for granted ever again. Not that we necessarily were before that, but that was really the thing where it's like, okay, this could happen. We're not really in control maybe as much as we thought, and there are external forces that can sweep in at a moment's notice and take over. And I mean, for me, I feel like I've always been like, relatively motivated and always pretty driven to really pursue, my what I love about music. But, during the pandemic, it's kind of like, wow, am I going to be able to do any of these things? Am I even going to be able to return to any sort of lifestyle, even as a musician after this? And so now, and certainly afterwards, when we started playing gigs again, and then I could get my band together for rehearsal, it's like, all right, it's go time. And now it's like, okay, how are we going to make this album happen? How am I going to afford it? How are we going to get the schedule? How are we going to get 17 people in the same room together? How, all these things. But it's like, all of these little sort of walls that you put up in your mind are really just things that we are self-created. And it's as much as we can create boundaries for ourselves, we can create motivation and inspiration for ourselves. And so it's kind of like, all right, we just got to do the work and just buckle down and make it happen because we don't know when it could be taken away again.
It's interesting because I remember during that time, especially my decision as a radio host was to amp up my interviews, do more and more, especially with musicians that were touring all the time. And it's weird to think back because we didn't know what was going to happen. I remember interviewing Al Di Meola. That was one of the most stark interviews that I did because he's such a prolific tourer. And he was talking about, he was comparing living through that as like cancer, like getting the diagnosis, finding that you needed to figure out, wrap your head around it, go through treatment, mourning, and all of that. It was very interesting, the metaphor of that. But you still didn't know whether or not you were going to get to a point where you were going to be healthy enough to do it again. And we didn't know what was going to happen. So the fact that now, the beauty of coming out of this is there's so many musicians that I've caught up with after the fact that have new albums that are playing live music and all of that because there was so much uncertainty. So it's wild how we move on. The world moves fast, but at that time we didn't know in the slowness if it was ever going to speed up again.
Absolutely. And yeah, even just thinking about our show that we did a couple of nights ago, anytime you get to play in front of a live audience, it's special and a very unique experience. You don't know what's going to happen. The audience could just be really energetic, be happy to be out that night and get a little inebriated and even maybe heckle the band at some moments, which could not necessarily be a bad thing because they bring a level of energy and interaction that could sort of ignite something new in the music too. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's always so special, and especially the live performances where people can come out because you never know how you're going to touch someone with the music, and being able to get together in the same room and play, especially when we're talking about improvising a lot of the music. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how the audience is going to take it. I mean, we just now I have to really think, and it's easy to think about this out of the pandemic, but like it's every time it's a special thing, and you don't know when the next time will be.
So this is your first big band album, which
Hmm.
we all know how hard big bands are from what I understand, how hard it is to corral. What was the motivating forces behind not only assembling such a big group of people, the kind of the vision for the project, even the cover that you talked about, which is very unique. How did all of this come together?
Well, yeah, I mean, even just thinking back to, my beginnings as learning music in public schools, a lot of public schools now do have really good jazz programs where they have big bands. They'll put you in a big band. Nowadays, you see even middle schoolers like 11, 12, 13-year-olds getting started in big bands. For me, it was in high school when I was around 15. I got to play my first big band. And from that moment, just sitting in that band, sitting in the saxophone section, hearing all this sound and energy around you. And at that time, I was playing with some upperclassmen. We had an amazing rhythm section. I remember they just absolutely burning. And I didn't know really how to play at that time, but I started listening, and my band directors would put on music, and my peers would share CDs with me, like Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane, Joshua Redman. And I was listening to big bands, Ellington, Basie, Mingus. And then as I got older, I discovered some of the modern bands like Maria Schneider, Darcy James Argue, and then digging into some of the like Miles Davis, Gil Evans stuff. And then eventually going to music school. I went to Indiana University for my undergrad and then out to Queens College in New York for grad school, both locations playing in a lot of great big bands. And then when I was out in New York, getting to play with the Jack Jeffers big band. He's a legendary trombone player out there. And then the Valeri Palminera big band, he was a trumpet player that played with Art Blakey back in the day. And so I've played in just so many great big bands. And, I never really had the desire to write my own music. And I'm always kind of surprised, when this bug really caught me. But it was maybe about 10 years ago. I was like, all right, I kind of want to just try to write some stuff, because that can make gigs more interesting. If you bring in your own stuff, you can kind of start to craft your own sound for even just a small group. And then I was thinking beyond that, in Indianapolis, I had such a strong peer group. There are a lot of great musicians here. I mean, we have a relatively small scene if you compare it to somewhere like Chicago or New York, but we have a very high level of talent in the small scene that we have. And so I was like, well, I could put together a big band of my friends and it could actually be really good. And so I started to envision this around 2016. And we had our first rehearsal in 2017. And I was really just trying to write my own charts, just see if I could, try my hand at this and put some music together that I liked. So then it was just a matter of, getting the people together. And, those first few gigs, was barely enough money to really convince people. But when I found out they liked the music, they're willing to come out for a little bit with the hope that it could really turn into something bigger. And so then eventually it was just like we got to the place where we had a solid book of charts that I had put together, and then I was like, okay, I want to get this in the studio. And so finally last year we pulled the trigger on that, and yeah, so now we're putting out our first album, and actually this coming weekend we're recording our second album, which will be released next year. And if ideally, if I can keep this ball rolling, I'd love to do one every year. But a lot of it does come down to funding. I mean, that's the probably the hardest part. Just because, I'll spend so much time writing music and practicing and rehearsing, but we're not really getting paid for that directly until we play a gig. So it's kind of like, how do I make this happen? And for us, I was like, okay, we're getting a bit of a following. What if I try to do a Kickstarter? And we ended up getting a Kickstarter and raised over $21,000 to do our album, which covered essentially all of the fundamental costs for it that I needed at that time. And this was just mostly like the Indianapolis community that were coming to our gigs that were putting this together. So for me, Communal Heart is as much of like the band community as it is the audience coming together. And with the album artwork, which was done by the wife of our bassist, her name's Kara Tucker. The bassist is Nick Tucker. So Kara, I just gave her the music and said, listen to it and do whatever you want because I love your vision and your art. So she listened and she decided to paint by hand the inside of an oyster, which for her sort of symbolized the community of that's within the shell and something that sort of has a lot of beauty that's very contained in a small space. And I wrote the full description on my website and you can read it. And she wrote it out. And so that would explain it better than me trying to. But that was essentially the idea behind it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's cool. Like we have her involved. We have so many other people in the community involved. So I don't really want it to be just about me, but hopefully like just growing the community and then expanding out from here.
So, especially with the crowdfunding kind of project, you're really a lot of what you produce is going to be a thank you to the community, and it's your first big shout out into the jazz world. What are you ultimately hoping the audience gets from this release?
Yeah, I think for me, like, I do love the idea of each listener taking their own reaction from the music however they will, whether they love it or hate it. I I do hope that they have a strong reaction to it, and I hope that a lot of them will take inspiration from it, just in terms of like personally for them in their own life. Not inspiration necessarily to like, oh, I want to go take piano lessons or I want to learn how to write a song or anything like that, but just the inspiration that, you can maybe see and hear the challenge of putting a project together like this, but then seeing the hopefully beautiful outcome that we have if you really stick to it and sort of see your vision out after a number of years where it's, you're just like crafting this idea and then eventually it comes and you have this nice artistic product at the end of that. So I think, individually, if you think about that, could mean anything. If you're trying to start your own business or maybe you're trying to um, improve relationships in your own life, whether it's with friends or family, or just if you have some aspect of your lifestyle that you want to change or improve, or really anything like that, or maybe your outlook on your neighborhood or your city or the country, anything where it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe this is something difficult and it's going to take some striving and some determination to get through, but hopefully I can see that it can be worth it if I really stick it out and not give up and just try to like uh, find that beauty in my own life. And that's going to lead to a stronger community, which is going to just, down the road, hopefully improve the world and, just make this a better experience for everyone.
So you talked about the CD release party, and we know how big live music can be and the formation of, loving this music and what was the first live show, first live jazz show that you saw that blew you away, that made you think I want to do it?
Yeah, well, I'll never forget. Actually, ironically, it was at the same venue where we just performed a couple of nights ago. It's at the Jazz Kitchen in Indianapolis. And at the time, I was in high school, and I was able to get in with like my friend's dad, as my guardian that night. And so I remember it was the Joshua Redman Quartet, and at that time I had had a few of his albums, and to me he was just a guy on a CD cover, and I had his CD in my boombox, and I was like, this is amazing. But then going to hear it live, where they're improvising, they're really stretching out on solos, you can see and hear the interaction within the band. I will never forget that because not only do you see somebody who's a master of the instrument, and it's the technical skill is impressive, but you feel the emotion and it comes through, and that was one of those things where I certainly caught the bug even more that night if I hadn't already completely caught it before that. And it was kind of one of those things where, the decision isn't mine. It's something outside of me where it's like, well, this is what you're going to be doing in some form or fashion. And so it's kind of cool now that we just played at the Jazz Kitchen because, I did see some high schoolers out in the audience and, hopefully we have a positive effect on them, just like it had on me that night.
So, what do you like the best about being a professional musician? What gets you up every day to create and to love this music and to present it to people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, it's a lot of like the discovery of the music. And I was even just a few minutes ago, I have my piano over here on the side, and I was just sitting down, messing around with a few ideas. And for me, I'm somebody who gets completely lost in that process. Whether it's practicing or actually trying to compose or just generate or brainstorm ideas. I don't know if it's going to turn into a composition. Maybe it will, maybe not. But like just going through that process and, maybe coming up with a melody and seeing where it goes, or finding a chord progression that really resonates with me and then pairing that together with a melody. As I was sitting at the piano, I started playing, and then for a second I snapped out of it and I was like, oh, I got to check the time because I have an interview. And I had to sit down here at the microphone and be like, well, I can't go back to the piano because I will be late for the interview because I get totally lost in the music and it just takes me away. And if I have a free day, I'm perfectly happy to sit down at the keyboard or with my saxophone all day and just work and come up with ideas, and then get to bring those ideas into the band, craft them, really put some polish on them, and then present them to an audience. So like the whole process is really satisfying, even though it is hard work, and all artists could use more compensation for it, but it's worth it in the end. So the whole
Yeah.
thing is great.
Well, I think the one thing that's the key is the strength of this jazz community and coming out of this pandemic and entering this era of uncertainty. There's, especially since January, how strong is this jazz community? Um, how are you feeling about the jazz community here in 2025?
Well, I feel great about it. I mean, it's always easy to maybe put a negative or positive spin on just about anything that you want, I think. And there are it would be easy to put negative spin on aspects of the jazz scene and the jazz community now. But what's encouraging to me is that we see so many different types of influences now, especially with a lot of the modern jazz acts, where and people are willing to embrace this. And you know, that's one of the great things. If you go to a festival, a lot of times you don't necessarily know what's under the jazz umbrella now, which I think is pretty exciting. I mean, I'm somebody who loves Radiohead as much as Rachmaninoff and everything in between. And so I love being open to that when I'm writing music and performing it. I want it to be able to go anywhere. And to me, that is a big spirit. Part of the spirit of jazz is as the freedom of expression and the not knowing necessarily where it's going to go. And that's exciting to me. And I love that we see that now and people aren't afraid to take risks. You see so many people trying out different instrumentations and working on things and, collaborating with different artists that you may not expect. But that's one of the cool things about it. And we get such a broad expanse of colorful outcomes when we think about it that way. So, I think if we can focus on that and keep our arms wide open as far as what's possible, not only with the music, but as far as how we present the music and the support that we can get with the music, then, we're going to be unstoppable and we're going to be able to reach more people and it's going to just continue to grow.
Well, it's proof positive with you raising 21,000 for a project. That right there to me is a huge level of proof as to where people are at and how strong this community is.
For
Uh,
sure. Yeah, that was something where even when we started to sell pretty decently at shows, I was kind of like, I was honestly surprised because I wasn't writing music thinking about, oh, this is going to be a really popular song. This is really going to sell the tickets. I was writing somewhat dissonant, angular, abstract modern jazz. And in my mind, that's what got me excited, but I never really thought it would resonate on the level that it has. And so I'm like, hey, if we can do this, and I'm writing like some kind of crazy stuff at times, like, wow, like, man, anything is possible now.
so why do you love this art form we call jazz?
Well, I love that it's it says yes to everyone. And what I mean by that is it's not only from the performer side of it, but from the listener side of it. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, your background. If you like it, then you're right. And if you play it and you try and you work and you practice, then you're also right. There's no right or wrong. It's just like how you sort of envision it. And you get to do whatever you want. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be great if you don't work at it. It takes a ton of work to be good at this stuff, but it's incredibly rewarding when you put the time in and it'll come back to you, in different ways. And thinking back to the community, I think that's one of the things that I've really grown to love over the past few years is that, I'm happy sitting in the room by myself practicing and writing music, but when it involves other people and we can get other people on board, then that's really exciting to me. Even people that don't necessarily know anything about music, they're not musicians, they'll come to the shows and they'll give me a hug after the show. They'll be like, "Oh, that was a great night of music. I'm so glad I came out." So that yeah, I certainly love that about it.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see one jazz show live, where are you going to go?
Oh, wow. Uh I might have to say one of the Ellington big band shows. Uh back in the day. Um, Man, that I don't know if I've ever thought about that. That's one of those questions where I typically don't even let myself think about it because it's just like torture. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, there's so many things. I mean, it would probably be Ellington, but it would also be hard to turn down Coltrane. Um, Now I will say I got to hear the Wayne Shorter Quartet twice. Um, and those shows were incredibly mind-blowing. So I feel like I was transported into almost like the history of jazz because I had seen and heard uh, videos and recordings of this stuff with Wayne Shorter and Miles, but then getting to see Wayne with his band with Danilo, Brian Blade, and John Patitucci. Those are my favorite concerts I've ever seen live. And so if I think in those terms, like yeah, somebody classic, I might have to say Train, but Ellington would be maybe a hard second.
So at the end of the day, Sean, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, everyone that you play with, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I guess I would say I'm a pretty sensitive person, and I try to put that through in my music. I also feel like I'm pretty naturally positive and optimistic person, which I certainly try to put through in the music too. I hope that that rubs off on the listener. I mean, I like when I think about the aspects of me that are coming through in the music. Hopefully, it's like something that's high energy, exciting, but also at times very introspective and quiet. I mean, I'm certainly an introvert, but I'm happy to put myself out there when it comes to uh, you know trying to present the music to people and make it energetic and make it something that people really want to listen to. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty quiet and sensitive and keep to myself a lot. But I, at that same time, I really like to have social connections, especially when they're one on one with people and getting to talk to people, after shows, that kind of thing.
So if anyone wants to catch you live again, pick up this album that will benefit you the best, anything that's going on in your world, where can they go?
Yeah, it's all listed on my website, seanimboden.com. Sean's Sean. It's easy to find. I try to keep that updated with shows, and we do have like a merch store if you're into vinyl, a CD, all that stuff. We have it on the site. I'll even send you a signed copy of the music. We've got other stuff like T-shirts, mugs. We have a cool logo made by my sister-in-law. And so yeah, it's all on there. And I've got quite a bit of shows coming up this summer, and hoping to get this big band, maybe if we can get it started to do some touring within the next year or so, and just start to branch out and see what we can make of it.
Well, we'd love to see you in Kansas City. Sean, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Best of luck with the release and everything else. Hopefully we catch up down the line.
Absolutely, Joe. It's nice talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Yes,
Jazz
sir.
fans, Joe Domino here, the host of the weekly Neon Jazz radio show and regular interview series being produced and distributed from Lee Summit, Missouri. We are very excited to let you know about the second annual Lee Summit Jazz Festival taking place again this summer on June 28th at the Bridge Space, located at 210 Southwest Market Street in downtown Lee Summit. Following the success of the 2024 festival, the lineup will include Lee Summit students, KC Area Youth Jazz, Paganova with Michael Pagan, Horoscope with Stan Kessler, Brad Gregory, Adam Larson, and the Lee Summit Jazz Orchestra. There will also be food trucks and vendors to round out a day of celebration. Early bird tickets are 2 for $30, and all details can be found at lsjazzfest.com. We can't wait to see you there.